Hey everybody, welcome to J Stern Designs and welcome to this episode of the Prom Gown Sew Along. I want to kick it off by sharing with you the lace that I ordered, and actually it just came in the mail today. So I am going to open it up right now and we're going to look at it together. I'm really excited. So let's open it up. Ooh. I think this is really pretty. It's very similar to the lace that was on the dress that she tried on, so I think she's gonna be happy. Depending on the style she ends up choosing, you know, she had a strapless version, and in a minute I'm gonna show you my first and second muslins, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to create those and how to fit and do some fine-tuned fitting. But basically, she's got a strapless bodice, and then over it I did this muslin of a sort of a shell that would go over it. And let me just take this off for a second. You know, so depending on what she decides, the lace will either, you know, go directly on here on this strapless foundation, or I will actually create a lace overlay with this sleeveless shell, you know, over it. So it's really going to depend on what she ends up liking. Another thing that came in the mail today was my swatch for a blue georgette, and I think this might be a tad too bright, but we'll see. I sent pictures of it with the lace to my daughter so she can decide if she likes it or not. But I'm really excited because now the top of my dress is starting to take shape, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But also, I have some of the fabrics, you know, the lace is now in, and it just sort of inspires me to keep working on it. It's kind of fun. So let's get on to fitting the muslin. What I did, because the bottom of the dress, if you remember, is just a plain skirt, I decided that I wasn't going to worry about cutting that out and trying that in my first fitting, because really once I get the top foundation to fit, then the skirt will be cake, because really it's just trapezoid shaped rectangles that are just sewn together and gathered around the bottom of the bodice. So I really wanted to focus on that first. So if you're working on a dress that doesn't have a fancy skirt, you know, you can leave that to the side for now and worry about it later. If you're working on something that has a lot of structure and a lot of fitting, then you probably want to get that going, you know, sooner than later, along with the top. So let me talk about what I did. Here is the front of the lace overlay that we may or may not be using in the end, but you can see I did a full bust adjustment. I like to do my full bust adjustments so they are up by the bust. I don't like to slice all the way down through the hem or the bottom of the bodice. And I will put a link to how to do a full bust adjustment like this in the blog post that goes along with this video. I basically drew a line that was apex level across. So I cut across the top of the dart and then straight across the bodice. And then I made a slash line from the front notch to where the apex is. And then, because Abby needed she needed like a DD cup, I spread the pattern 3/4 of an inch. And I taped this back down. Then I made sure that my slash also opened 3/4 of an inch. And then what that did was it opened the dart and made it larger. Now I want to talk about that because depending on the size of your bust, this dart can get really, really large. It can start to close the armhole. So one of the things that you can do to minimize that effect is if you're working with a dress pattern that has a waist dart as well, you can transfer some of the fullness of this dart into the waist dart if it gets to be too big at the bust. And essentially what you would do is you would cut this out, and then you would cut this out, and you would shut this a little, and you would pivot here, and the bottom one would open. So if anybody needs help doing that, transferring some of the fullness from the bust dart to the waist dart, if their bust dart ends up being too big, you can shoot me an email or comment on the blog post or below this video, and I will show you how to do that. But that's one way to deal with a bust dart that gets too large. So I did that, and I did it with this yellow tracing paper so you can see the adjustment I did. And that's all I did at this point. All of this extra around the edge was added after I tried it on her the first time. So I just did a full bust adjustment here. And in the back, I didn't do anything. So the back was just plain. I mean, I sewed the back together as it was. And I ended up with this muslin. And you can see, I want to show you two different things that can happen when you're working with a fitted bodice like this. Now, I used the measurement of the high bust, so this area on the chest should have fit fine. It ended up being a little bit too big. So what I did was I pleated out, and you can see right up here, I took this, pinned out this little diagonal pleat of fabric, and it ends in the tip of the dart down here, and the tip of the bust dart. And basically, I took out just half of what I needed to totally take, across. So it worked out to be like a 1/4 inch on each side that would need to come out to make this rest nice and flat on Abby. And what I did to fix the paper is I took my ruler like this, okay, and I drew a line from the tip of the dart to the neckline. I slashed it, as well as I opened up the bust dart. I just overlapped this little bit from here to here, okay, and I went down to 0 here, and it opened up this little bit over here. So I pleated out this extra, okay, and it goes down to 0, and then I opened it up down here. Okay, so I transferred a little bit more to the bust dart. So that actually made this area fit more smoothly across, just under her neckline. And she also needed a little bit more room. It fit like a scuba suit. So I added a 1/2 inch, and I added it to the actual base of the armhole as well, because this is a sleeveless shell, and she needed it straight through. So I added a 1/2 there, and then I blended to 3/4 of an inch down here. She also needed an additional inch of length, so I added that as well for my second muslin. All right, so at the back of the neck, what was happening was it was really big here. Okay, I could pinch out like 1 inch on each side, and it was barely fitting down here. So she needs room through the midriff, but across her shoulders and the back of her neck, it was too big. So here's how I fixed that. All right, so I drew a line here to show you, I just wanted to show you, this is how much that needed to be removed right here where I drew this line. You want to keep your center back seam straight so that you can't just chop that off. Instead, what I did was I made a slash line right here, 2 inches away from the center back. I slashed to the hem, and then I overlapped the piece. And you can see from here to here, it's overlapped, okay? And then it goes down to nothing here. And if I just draw a line across the armhole level like this, so you can see, I'm really not taking out, I'm taking out a 1/4 inch there, but by the time you get to where it was really tight under, I'm taking out either negligible amounts or nothing. So even though I am taking out a little bit up here, that's okay, because it still was a little loose there. It was just down here it got really tight. So what I did to the side is I added a 1/2 inch there, and I added 3/4 inches down here, and the inch to match the front. So that's how I adjusted the muslin after I tried it on her the first time. Now I have 2 things going on. That was the overlay, and then You can see here I have the strapless foundation, and you know, I needed to do a bust adjustment on the overlay, so obviously I needed to do a bust adjustment on the strapless foundation as well. And this is how I did it. It's a princess seam. So I slashed across apex level and I spread it 3/4 of an inch. And I spread the center front 3/4 of an inch. And also I added about 3/8 along this seam here. I didn't add it to the other side because I wanted to see what would happen. I didn't want it to get funky. But basically I added it there, and I slashed and spread and added it there. The other thing I did is, you'll see that this line right here, the original pattern was a princess or a sweetheart neckline, and it came down to a point at the center front. So what I did was I took my French curve and I just started at the original seam edge here, and I just drew a nice, you know, new curved line to make it go straight across. So you can see how I reshaped the top portion of the center part of this strapless foundation. And, you know, I just left the original line there so I could show you the difference. And I actually added almost 2 inches of depth to the center front of the bodice. And even with that on, Abby was like, oh, can we pull it up higher? So I can already see she's a little self-conscious, and I'm not really sure how the whole strapless thing is going to go in terms of how she's going to like to wear it, but we'll see. I did add some there. That's how I adjusted the strapless foundation, and this is what it looks like. When I tried it on her, the back edges at the center back barely closed. So my dress form is smaller, so it's not going to look the same way, but essentially I had the back edges were like this. Like they would touch, but I needed more. And when I looked at the side seam, you know, sometimes you need to add to a front or back bodice and not both, because when I looked at the side seam on her, it was straight and it was right on her side seam. So really she was just more broad across her back, and she needs just some more room in the back on this strapless foundation. So to fix that, what I did was I just added 1 inch on the center back. After you make these fine-tuning fitting adjustments, you're going to make a second muslin. And for this muslin, I'm not using muslin fabric. So a lot of times we refer to the muslin and people automatically think, okay, a muslin or a fit garment is going to be just out of the muslin fabric. I decided to use silk organza on the overlay because I wanted to give the see-through sort of effect of the lace, so Abby could get an idea of how it would look if it was on. I think she was having a hard time envisioning the lace going all the way up to her neck because it was a solid white piece of fabric. The other thing is she was having a hard time realizing how wide the shoulders would be because the seam allowances were still there. So what I did was I sewed in the seam allowance along the neckline and on the armhole here so she can see how wide the shoulder seam is. And that way, if she likes to have this overlay, but she wants it a little bit narrower, you know, I can draw on this now and I can show her what the finished shape could be. But just putting in these seam allowances, I think will help her get a better idea of what the actual shape of the overlay is. So I made it out of silk organza because I had a ton of it. You know, you can use anything that's sort of sheer and see-through if you're making an overlay where the under part is going to show. If you use something like silk organza, it's a really good idea to treat it with a healthy squirt of starch, because that will make it much easier to work with. You don't want to be struggling sewing your muslin together that you're just using for fitting. You don't want to take a ton of time sewing that. You want it to be accurate and you want it to be, you know, well sewn, but, you know, certainly if you spray starch on the organza and then let it dry, it'll be much more agreeable and it won't shift around on you. So that's how I made the overlay with the adjustments that I showed you on the pattern. Now, for the strapless foundation, I'm using, instead of muslin, I'm using a polished cotton twill because it's a little bit shinier and prettier looking than the muslin, but it's also hefty enough that I didn't have to interface a fabric. So I wanted something with some structure, but that just looked a little prettier. And what I want to do is I want to give you a tip for sewing a princess seam at the bust, because what happens when you sew these pieces together, let me just lay this down here. Here's my center front, and here is my side front. You can see that there's a little extra in here. So if you run a row or even 2 rows of gathering stitches, it makes it really easy to fit this piece in and get it to lay nice. So just simply, running in this, you notice this is in the seam allowance, it's about 1/4 inch away. If you use the same color thread as your fabric, you'll never even have to remove them. So unless you're working with a see-through fabric. But basically what I did was I just ran my little gathering stitches here. And then to put this together, I'm going to match my 2 pieces, right sides together, at the base of the bodice. And then I'm going to go ahead and match them up at the neckline edge, or the top edge of the foundation, like this. And I'm going to just pin it 1 to 1 until I get to my gathering, because I gathered between the notches on the pattern. So I got that like that, and then I'm going to match up the bottom portion of the seam 1 to 1 till I get to the base of the gathering. And then you can see, I'm going to hold it this way, see how it just sticks up? It's a little bit bigger. Well, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently pull it up a little bit from both ends to get it to fit in. And I'm just going to run my finger along and pet it like this, and I'm just going to do a little bit on this side. And it's really not a lot. You can actually over gather this really quickly. But see, something like that, where see how nicely that's fitting in now? And then you won't have to struggle with getting that little bit of ease in. So I'm just going to pin it, and then I'm going to sew this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together this whole second muslin on the dress form so you can see how it looks. And you can see that using fabric that is not muslin fabric can give you a better idea of how your finished garment is going to look too. So I'm just going to sew this now. I'm just going to put in a quick seam. For this, I like to have the gathers where I can see them. That way I'm sure I'm not folding over anything. See, it's not even pressed, and you can see it's just very nice and fitted in there. It's nice and smooth. All right, so let's try this on the dress form now, and I want to show you how these 2 pieces look together with the see-through sheer organza on top. All right, when Abby gets home from her volleyball, I will obviously try this on her, and I will share with you how it fits. But for now, I just want you to see that, you can see how the, just pull this one tight too. You can see how the 2 layers look, and you've got the effect of having just the sheer overlay on top of a strapless foundation. So when I get back from teaching at the social sewing retreat the first week of April, we're going to start working with that lace. So that's going to be fun. And by then, we'll know how this is all fitting, and we'll know which style Abby is going to want to wear, either the overlay or just the plain strapless foundation. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But this is an example of using, different fabrics for your muslin. If you have any questions about, working with fitting your bodice, if fitting issues came up that I didn't cover today in this episode, please post them. Either post comments in my blog. You can email me. I want to thank Susan. She actually took the time to email me and ask me about she's making a woodland fairy dress, and I thought that was very cool. It's got a silk chiffon skirt, and she needed lining that wouldn't slip because she's going to be riding her horse ears, which I cannot wait to see her pictures. This is so exciting. So we came up with the idea of possibly using something that doesn't slip as a lining, like maybe cotton lawn or cotton voile, something that's light and floaty to, complement the chiffon overskirt, but, maybe choosing something lightweight for the lining that doesn't slip. So I thought a cotton might be a good choice for that. So thank you, Susan, and please keep me posted if you need more help. And if anybody else has questions or comments, please let me know, because I'm very excited to help you, and this is such a fun process. I just want to share it with everybody, so yay. All right, so over the weekend and on Monday, I'm going to fine tune the fit of this on Abby, and I will actually show you how this fits her, and we will make a decision on whether or not we want to have the overlay or just the strapless foundation. So next week's really going to be about, finalizing the design, starting to work with the fabric. We're using lightweight, shifty fabric, so I'll give you tips on how to lay out your fabric so it's on grain and get your pieces on the fabric so they're on grain. And then we'll be cutting things out, and I'll give you tips on sewing French seams and some other construction tips that can help you, including interfacings, because you're going to want to interface the upper pieces to give them some structure and stability. Plus, I'm going to talk about boning, because obviously we're going with a strapless foundation here and we want it to be comfortable. So we'll also talk about boning next week. So those are the things we're going to talk about next week. Please keep me posted if you need help, and I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week for more prom gown adventure.